Rosie Winston MP. His thesis is entitled The Incorporation of Ballistic Missile Defence into the Labour Government Security Policy 1997 to 2010, and he will be talking here about the third wave, foreign policy and ballistic missile defence.
Hi, afternoon everyone, or morning should I say. This little camera's just filming me, so don't worry about that. It's just so I can get some feedback for myself on my presenting skills. So this afternoon, this morning, I'm looking at the third wave foreign policy and ballistic missile defence, and I'm a part-time tutor at Craven College and I teach A-levels, so I will be drawing diagrams on the board as well, so you can imagine me doing your A-levels again. So I've got PowerPoint, I've got a little presenter and I've got a camera, so no over-reliance on technology at all. Perhaps like the American military and ballistic missile defense. So, is it possible to draw on this board with a little...
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
So I thought it was useful to use PowerPoint for this because of the technical nature of some aspects of ballistic missile defence. I think it's good to show that on the board. Okay, so we're going to look at what ballistic missile defence actually is for a start, then summarise what third wave foreign policy might look like, and then look at third wave foreign policy, ballistic missile defence, and the relationship between Blair and Clinton over that. Okay, so what is ballistic missile defence? Well, in traditional nuclear deterrence, what you have, let's say you've got country A fires at country B, country B detects that and fires its own nuclear missiles, nuclear war. With ballistic missile defence, what you should have is country A fires its nuclear weapons, country B detects that, and instead of launching back, fires a missile to destroy it in the air. That's the basic theory behind it. Now, what is Britain's role in this, if we're talking about a partnership between the US and America? So there's two major components of this system that are both based in Yorkshire, not too far from Leeds. The first one is Fylingdales, which is a radar base, which basically has got a range of 3,000 kilometres. Now, its traditional use is to detect the incoming nuclear missiles. And there's also Menwith Hill, which is quite near Leeds, and what this does is it's primarily a spy base, but its role in ballistic missile defence is to link with these satellites that are up in space and are sort of thousands of miles out, so they can observe the whole planet. And those satellites' role is they would detect the infrared signal of nuclear missile launchers from anywhere in the world. And they feed back into that system because Fylingdales, because it's a radar, it can't see below the horizon. So that's how the two complement each other. Now, during the period that we are looking at, these two systems were purely in this kind of reactive mode. They were linked into Trident, the American system. The goal would have been to make them actually be able to play a part in shooting down the missiles. But between 1997 and 2001, where Blair and Clinton were both in office, it was merely talking. It was sort of a prelude to these kind of decisions. Okay, so that's a little bit of background. Right, so if we're talking about the third way, we're talking about politics, we're talking about triangulation, I think what we need to link back to a little bit is Labour's problem with defence. Now, the Labour Party in Britain has always had a massive problem with its defence image vis-à-vis the Conservatives. The Conservatives have always been ahead in the polls, and even if you look over a 20, 30-year period of sort of opinion polling, there was only actually one occasion where Labour was considered to be more competent in defence terms than the Conservatives, even in the dark days of Ian Duncan Smith, etc. And that was at the beginning of the Afghanistan war. So even though Labour managed to narrow the gap, so to speak, the Conservatives have always dominated the sort of national psyche in terms of defence competency. So what we saw of the evolution to New Labour in the third way, basically the idea that the general public don't like Michael Foot pushing a pram at a C&D rally, they like Thatcher in a tank. So that is the kind of national discourse which the Labour Party was confronted with, and why it needed, so its supporters would say, of the third way to change that policy. Okay, so what did this third way policy look like then? Well, As I was saying, an attempt to overcome accusations by Republicans and Conservatives of being soft on defence. And I think Blair actually went further than Clinton did on this. He gave this quite famous speech, the Doctrine of the International Community speech at Chicago in 1999 during the Kosovo conflict. And he basically said that in this increasingly globalised world, the Westphalian system of national sovereignty was breaking down, and it was the duty of the international community to get involved in countries where the government was of those countries either abusing its own citizen or was an egregious violator of human rights. Now you can see where that idea came into issues to do with Iraq and getting involved in Afghanistan, and you could say that Blair overplayed his hand there. Some people have speculated that if Blair had never got involved in Iraq, he might have still been Prime Minister a lot longer than he had been. But it was certainly Blair was pushing more than Clinton to send ground troops into Kosovo, etc. And there's a comment by Strobe Talbot who said something like, that Clinton Blair, he'll fight for the last American. That idea that it's all right for Britain to go on about this, but it's the Americans that would actually end up fighting. Okay, so how does this link in if we're talking about with American politics? Well, in America, BMD was a big issue. The Republicans were determined to sort of portray the Democrats as weak on this. Clinton himself was not keen on ballistic missile defence. He saw it as a spur to proliferation. He was keen in theatre defence, sort of defending troops on the battlefield, but he was not in favour of missile defence. But he had to try and triangulate this rising Republican surge for missile defence with his own sort of reticence and sort of some of the people in the Democrats who were against this. So what did he do? He came up with this plan called the 3+3 plan in '96, which was basically to kick it into the long grass, kick it down the pitch a little bit. So 3 years of development, then there would be a decision, and then it would take 3 years to actually build the system that might actually be able to shoot down a few missiles, let's say. But by September 2000, when it was time to make this decision, only 3 tests had actually taken place. Only one had succeeded, and they were highly sort of, I don't want to use the word rigged as sort of being overly cynical, but they were very strict within very strict limits, these tests. So he basically said, I'm not going to do this. There was an election coming up. I'll let the incoming president, whoever that is, make the decision. Basically, more research was needed. So that was the domestic political situation in the US. In the UK, it was quite a different situation. So, whereas in America ballistic missile defence was a big issue, in the UK it was a really marginal issue, at least for this time. Beyond sort of maybe your traditional anti-nuclear war pressure groups like CND, etc. At this point, it was a very small issue which wasn't registering with the public at all. So, if I've been talking about the need to triangulate. And how this links in with the political issue, that kind of throws a bit of a problem in the works, because if it wasn't an issue for Labour in terms of losing votes, because it just wasn't important to the public, why would Labour need to do something about this issue then? Nonetheless, the Conservatives still try to make a lot of capital out of this, constantly attacking, bringing back CND into everything, harking back to the 1980s as we looked at. It seemed like there was a spectre haunting this debate, the spectre of CND. All the time, the Conservatives trying to make attacks, but none of it outside of Parliament was kind of sticking. It just wasn't a big issue. I suppose the closest that it came to being a political issue was this spat between Hayne and Hoon, sort of in 2000. Jeff Hoon was the Defence Secretary at the time. Peter Hayne was a junior minister, but kind of have a higher profile due to his background in the Labour Party, more of a high-profile figure. And they both appeared on the same evening, one on Channel 4, one on Newsnight, while members of the government ministers to give opposite sort of opinions. And particularly Hayne himself was absolutely leapt on by the Conservatives to try and say, he's the one that really represents what Labour is about. They're not about really defending us. They're not New Labour and wanting to look after us. They are the CND disarmers of old. But again, for all the heat and bluster from that, it never really caught on. So Blair and Clinton showed some understanding between each other. Blair was understanding towards the Americans' concerns about proliferation and wanting to do something about that. But what was really important, and again maybe where you see some convergence, sort of third-way convergence, some third-way thinking on this, was the fact that neither Blair nor Clinton wanted to exacerbate nuclear proliferation by going whole hog with this ballistic missile defence issue. For example, they both desperately wanted to stick to the ABM treaty. You may not be aware of that, or you may have heard of it, but it was basically a treaty which allowed a minimalistic missile defence system for the United States and for Russia, limited to one site and 100 interceptors, which basically wouldn't be able to do very much if there was an actual nuclear war. Now, Clinton was in favour of this because he did not want to exacerbate proliferation, but interestingly, Blair was of the same mind, but there was an added distinction to this, and this was if the ABM treaty broke down and America went ahead with a full-throated missile defence, and Russia responded in kind and built its own missile defence, it would basically neutralise Britain's nuclear deterrent. You know, we've got a relatively small nuclear deterrent, and if Russia developed its own missile defence, you know, Trident would basically be useless. So that was an added concern with Blair, that they didn't want to undermine Britain's nuclear deterrent by allowing America or Russia to go ahead with that. Not that Britain was a signatory to that treaty, it wasn't, but it had an interest in it maintaining in place. So, why therefore would Labour, why would Blair be interested in would have any opinion on missile defence if it wasn't going to be a big issue electorally? Well, the real reason is because, let's move on. For Clinton, missile defence was a way of triangulating accusations by Republicans of being weak on defence. But for Blair, because it wasn't an electoral issue, so why was this of any importance? I think it's a sort of two levels removed why it was of importance. Not necessarily because missile defence was anything of any concern to the British public, it wasn't. But in the wider picture, Britain being seen as a strong and powerful country, being seen as maybe a partner of America, being seen as a partner in the special relationship, it was important for Blair to do anything or to maintain that relationship. And going along with the US's missile defence plans was a means to an end. So it wasn't that missile defence in itself was an electoral issue, but certainly doing what was necessary to keep the US on side, to keep Britain looking strong, was that kind of electoral issue which would have played well with the voting public in the UK. And I'd like to finish there.